Alrighty, I think we can get started. Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone. I cannot believe we are in our last summit session of the day of the summit. I don't know about y'all, but these last couple of days have completely flown by for me, and they've been nothing short of incredible. But before we jump into what we're here for today, I just want to take a second to remind everyone now that the summit is almost over to please fill out our summit feedback survey. We're just going to put it in the chat right now. And we've said this a million times, but if you haven't heard this before, if you fill it out by next Sunday, March 2nd, you'll be entered into a raffle to win a book by one of our speakers, including the speaker that we're all here to see today, Yashica Dutt. So very exciting. Please fill it out. Before we introduce our closing speaker, I just wanted to take a moment to share our gratitude for the many, many people who made this summit possible. If we can go to the next slide. Perfect. First of all, to our speakers who generously offered their time and expertise. This is our longest speaker list by far. We were so excited to do a proposal process for the first time this year, and I think it really paid off because what an incredible group of speakers and sessions. We can go to the next slide. I also want to thank SOAR's sponsors. The summit truly would not have been possible without y'all. And we can also see our supporters on the next slide. Again, we would not be here without our sponsors and our supporters, both organizations and individuals. We can go to the next slide. Our deepest gratitude to many, many other folks as well, including the amazing Summit Hype Squad who facilitated some of our community building and networking sessions. And I'm sure y'all saw them on Whova and over email and social media, just hyping all of us up the past few weeks. Of course, thank you to our SOAR board as well. They're always there for us to lean on and remind us to drink water and take care of ourselves, especially Aparna. But really, all of you are just so, so incredible. And also thank you to the Whova team. I think it's safe to say that it's been a pretty fun summit getting to use Whova this year, and that really would not have been possible without my main man, John Santiago, who I've probably sent a trillion emails over the past couple months. I promise you that's not an exaggeration. He was out here responding to me at 2 a.m. on Friday night. So what a king, truly. And most importantly, to all of you, our incredible members and partners for showing up today, taking time out of your incredibly busy, important schedules to take a moment and just step back, learn, and connect. I know I say this a lot, but we truly wouldn't be here without y'all doing the frontline grassroots work and organizing you do. We are just so, so eternally grateful. And I will pass it to Amrita to introduce our closing speaker.
Thank you so much, Himadri. What a beautiful way to ground us in all of the gratitude for such an amazing 2 days. And as we close out the summit, I think we're reflecting on so much. And I know one of the things I'm definitely reflecting on is the power of telling our own truths and speaking truth to our power. I can't think of anybody who embodies that better than Yashica, someone who will invite us to reflect on truth telling, resistance, and reimagining what's possible. Yashica Dutt is an author, activist, many things, someone who has shaped global conversations on caste, identity, and justice. Her groundbreaking memoir, Coming Out as Dalit, has given language to the experiences that so many have been forced to hide. And her story is one of defiance and courage, of challenging systems designed to erase and reclaiming history that deserves to be told, not just histories, but stories. And I think that too is so resonant for any survivors and advocates who are on this call because it really speaks to the heart of our work. Having heard Yashica speak a few times now, I know that you all will be blown away and that she'll leave us with clarity and conviction as we think about dreaming and building the future of this movement together. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Yashica.
Thank you so much. That was so well put together, Amrita. Thank you. And I am so thrilled at being here. I have seen all of you work very hard over the past couple of days, and I really appreciate all of you for spending time with us, spending time with me today, and for inviting me to this incredible space to begin with for SOAR. I've been listening into the sessions and learning about the wonderful strength, creativity, and vulnerability that our community has to offer. the generous and breathtaking ways in which we are redefining ourselves and resisting external pressures and ideas that tell us who we ought to be to exist in the world today. They have been eye opening and also give us a roadmap of how we need to move forward in these times. I deeply, deeply appreciate having this space to commune and ground ourselves, recognizing the unique traumas and challenges that both build and beleaguer our South Asian communities. And I want to congratulate SOAR for pulling off a terrific summit, especially at a time when nonprofits are famously rethinking their strategies about supporting marginalized voices and causes. And I'm deeply honored to be surrounded by all of you, folks in movement spaces and beyond, who are committed to principles of justice, representation, reflection, healing, and abolition. And I want to start by acknowledging that this is a mind numbingly disorienting and devastating time for so many of us, which is why I thank you for being here, for engaging, and for holding on to the fountain of hope that often only comes when we see each other, hear our anxieties echoed in another, and be in community with one another. Our trans siblings have had a war declared on their existence, and the marginal efforts at representation and inclusion of Black and Brown folks have been snatched back after being labeled as DEI and censured for being too woke. Language that was born out of the struggle and marginalization of Black people and Brown people has been turned back at us and weaponized to fortify the bulwarks that will now be used to exclude us from the systems that decide our fates. It's suddenly uncool to be justice minded, to ask for parity, to demand inclusion and be intersectional. It is now weak or considered weak to hold on to our humanity. It's cringe to care. The socially conscious culture that many of us had championed into moving forward, even if it was by an inch, has seemingly overnight inverted into a dark and sinister ideology where hatred is the currency and cruelty is the goal. I want to acknowledge that after a constant assault on our attention spans over the last few months with news and stories, each more terrifyingly depraved than the last, many of us have had no choice but to turn our phones down, our heads away, and maybe even our hearts numb. It's a survival strategy. Believe me, I understand, especially against a system that evaluates your worth by how much value you provide to those who profit off your labor, that expects you to be in work meetings as planes fall from the sky and flip over on runways, to participate in endless branding and marketing exercises where your creativity and emotions are a commodity to feed algorithms and artificial intelligence, and to compete with everyone else doing exactly the same thing. Not only is the culture around us making it overwhelmingly arduous to engage and resist the slow erosion of our own rights, but it is also rewarding those who augment the culture's descent into callousness. The way things are at the moment, there is perhaps no rational reason to continue holding on to our belief systems that many of us have fought immensely to cultivate. Wouldn't be just easier to give in to the slide towards antipathy and detachment and co-sign the demonization and destruction of a few as long as it keeps us safe? Why should we care when it's so hard to keep on doing it? Because caring is the only thing that will save us. And not just in the metaphorical way of being saved because it is the right thing to do, because caring is what will protect our souls from becoming darkened and desensitized towards the beauty, the creativity, the joy, and the humanity the world has to offer. We must care because it offers us a way out of closing ourselves to the world around us. We must care because caring in a culture that wants to harden our souls and blacken our hearts is the ultimate form of resistance. And that's why I want to applaud each and every one of you for being here. You are here because you never stopped caring. You are here because you fundamentally understand the truth that the only way to take on massive systems is to do it together. You're showing up and engaging even when it seems insurmountable. And for that, I want you to take a moment, turn on your mics, and give yourselves a big round of applause. Do it. You probably know that what is happening at this moment in the United States and its impact on the rest of the world is rooted in the dehumanization of the most vulnerable and marginalized people. We have often heard the phrase that the cruelty is the point. But I also want to underscore that for many communities, this nonstop deluge of cruelty is not something that started on January 20th, 2025. Many of us have always been at the receiving end of this indifference, where our oppression and subjugation is not simply ignored, but encouraged. Just so a social order we have come to recognize as real can continue to exist. This couldn't be more clear than over the last 2 years when an allegedly woke administration carried out the most blatantly murderous campaign against Palestinians, as the entire media infrastructure of the Western world banded together to create a narrative to normalize and create consent for their genocide. It was stunning to see the university spaces and organizations that many of us had come to recognize as progressive do a complete about face on values they had claimed to profess and turn against their own students and faculty, many of them from vulnerable, marginalized, and immigrant spaces themselves. The sanctioned subjugation of a people, simply because it protects an existing order of the world as we know it, is also something we see acutely in South Asian spaces. It's the idea of protecting and preserving values that directly draw on caste, simply because that's what defines who we are. It's the caste based hierarchy that we witness in our societies, that drills in our subconscious about who deserves safety, who deserves protection from harm, respect, who deserves validation, to be heard, to be taken seriously, to be believed, and who gets to get away with causing the harm, the trauma, the violence that is casually understood as the fate of those of us who happen to be from the so-called lower castes. We cannot talk about any aspect of harm that is perpetuated in our societies without addressing how caste teaches us to view some of us as inherently and intrinsically lower than the others. We cannot fully address the intergenerational cycles of violence and abuse without also discussing how caste-based patriarchy sanctions those patterns to perpetuate unchecked across generations. Especially in movement spaces as these, we have to be clear-eyed about the pitfalls of caste and how it shows up in ways when you least expect it, and why it's necessary to overcome our resistance in addressing it directly. Some of you might be familiar with my work as a Dalit journalist and author, and someone with a visible voice on caste in India and the United States. And if you've been following the anti-caste movement over the last few years, you might also know that this is an especially dark time for us. Many of us, including myself, are terrified of what's to come. After decades of work that was sustained by Dalit and Adivasi communities, the anti-caste movement in the United States came into the mainstream spotlight with the incredible courage of the Dalit engineer who took his Brahmin managers to court, along with his employer, the Silicon Valley giant Cisco, for discrimination on the basis of his caste in the summer of 2020. Isabel Wilkerson's book, Caste, as we all know, and its film adaptation by Ava DuVernay in Origin in 2024 further buoyed the understanding of this uniquely South Asian phenomena by the larger non-South Asian American public. The exploitation of Dalit laborers in the construction of the Akshardham Temple in Robbinsville, New Jersey, gained massive attention. And in 2023, Seattle became the first city in the United States to add caste as a protected category in its legal framework, following dozens of colleges and universities across the country that had already made that amendment. That same year, Fresno in California became the second city to legally acknowledge and recognize caste. Caste, we thought, was well on its way to getting the global recognition as among the most horrific and systemically oppressive ideologies still in action that it had always escaped so far. And then came the devastating verdict in California, where Governor Gavin Newsom, known across the country as among the most progressive Democratic candidates, used his power to veto a bill that had already passed with overwhelming majority in the state legislature to block California from adding caste protections to its constitution. Newsom had allegedly given into the pressure from Hindu donors with deep pockets and connections to the Hindutva movement in India, who did not wish to see caste to be acknowledged. And more importantly, for that recognition to tarnish their gleam of model minority, a label that many Indian Americans still deem as their hard-earned birthright, as opposed to white supremacy pitting a set of marginalized folks against another set of marginalized folks. Ironically, this news of the veto of the California bill came on October 7, 2023. The same day we learned about the attacks that would eventually lead to 16 months of aggressive destruction and aggravated genocide in Gaza. From that day, the mainstream culture in America shifted in a way where it was no longer seen necessary to pretend to care, to have empathy for the marginalized. The fates of those in Palestine and those of us from oppressed castes in the United States were inextricably linked, albeit with clearly vastly different consequences. The Hindu organizations and the individuals that had vehemently opposed the bill and used every connection they had celebrated this veto as a victory against the anti-caste movement, also as a proof that caste indeed did not exist in South Asian spaces. According to influential Indian American donor and lobbyist Ramesh Kapoor, and this is a direct quote, he got in touch with VP Kamala Harris's office at that time to pressure Newsom to drop the bill. To those of us in the anti-caste movement, it became evident that a democratic government was more than willing to side with those they had claimed to oppose in public at the expense of those of us they claimed to protect, simply because it was politically expedient. However, if the Democrats were willing to throw the anti-caste movement under the bus, the Republicans were ready to declare an all-out war. On November 1st, just days before the election, then Republican nominee Donald Trump tweeted, "We will protect Hindu Americans from anti-religion agenda of the radical left," while promising, obviously, to strengthen ties with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. It was a clear call out and a dog whistle for the anti-caste movement and a warning to those of us with visible voices against caste that we will be dealt with for daring to bring attention to this ongoing apartheid that deeply plagues our communities. Of course, as many of us know, that since November, the Trump administration's tune on Indian communities in particular has vastly shifted, especially with the removal of Vivek Ramaswamy from DOGE for criticizing the American work ethic. His outspokenness and, dare I add, upper caste entitlement led to an onslaught of open, vicious, and frankly unprecedented anti-Indian racism online, not only in the United States, but also in Canada. The 19-year-old DOD staffer Marco Iles, who was initially suspended for tweeting "normalize Indian hate," was not only reinstated, but was openly supported by the current Vice President J.D. Vance, who is famously married to and has two children with Indian American Usha Vance. Notably, yet unsurprisingly, Usha remained characteristically mute on this issue. But simply, an increase in anti Indian racism does not equate to a greater acceptance for the anti caste movement. It merely signals that those who exhibit the greatest loyalty to this administration will be rewarded with the carte blanche to continue their violent agendas with impunity. We continue to be told that we don't belong in these spaces where we already exist, in American offices, neighborhoods, classrooms, communities, and yes, even movement spaces. Almost every Dalit and Adivasi person you speak with will have a story of feeling othered, being discriminated, feeling unwelcome, being held back, or being made to feel less than. And that includes myself. South Asian movement spaces, whether they're organizing against Hindu fundamentalism, on any number of other issues that affect our communities, will often discuss caste, but fall shy of making it a fundamental part of their work. In the past few years alone, we have seen countless examples of dominant caste movement spaces attempting caste work, but giving up because it seemed too difficult or challenged too many beliefs. Well, here's the thing: undoing a belief system that goes back thousands of years in one of the most ancient civilizations of the world, that's not going to be easy. But it's worth doing because that is what strong communities do. They remain in constant dialogue with each other and create space to grow. We care not because it is the right thing to do. We care because it makes us stronger. Because at the end of the day, that's the most powerful thing we can do, especially right now. Thank you so much.
Yashica, thank you so much. There's a lot of love and resonance in the chat, so I will let you just absorb that. But from our team, just thank you for illuminating and sharing so much truth. I feel like every line was eye-opening. And I appreciate you taking the time to educate us too for parts of the anti-caste movement that we may not know about in this room. Thank you for reminding us as a movement of advocates and survivors to not choose numbness, but instead to choose care, which I think is natural, but the reminder in this current moment is extra helpful. And that care in itself is a form of resistance. And thank you. I just want to thank you for distilling, I think, something that you said that distills why our struggles are connected, because we talk about systemic oppression a lot, but I feel like when you said, it pushes us to rewrite the answers to the questions: who gets protected and who gets away with harm. And I think that's one that's fundamentally something we seek to flip in the survivor movement. And just to see you connect it to global genocide, to the caste movement, and really any other movement for justice. So thank you so much for sharing your heart and your time and energy with us. And we're profoundly grateful and appreciative.
Thank you so much for having me. I really hope folks take away a lot of love, a lot of being uplifted, but also being called in, because that is what we need to do. We need to do that with each other. So thank you for having me here.
There's so much love, but another round of applause, the way you made us applause for ourselves, but for you. Thank you so much. And on that note, we have one final set of thank yous to give. I'm just gonna wait for this slide to show. This won't be a surprise to anyone, but we couldn't end the summit without a big round of thank yous to the SOAR team, starting with myself, but Himadri, our logistics queen, and slayage manager, Yasmin, our digital baddies manager, which, if these terms don't make sense, I'm sorry, they're just internal team terms to celebrate the goodness and magic of our team. Sarajam, our membership associate, also Slayage associate. Hannah, who manages vibes, also manages stories and our entire sanctuaries anthology. Nahi, one of our newest teammates who's just completely crushed every task we've given her for this summit, and is our logistics princess and usually our social media queen. Kushali, who has been on social media the past 2 days, also does fundraising with me, so we lovingly call her our sugar masi. And Priscilla, who hasn't joined us for the summit today, but is our administrative mummy. So thank you to all of these incredible teammates. I feel like I don't have to say it too much. You all know how wonderful the SOAR team is, and we're really, really, really grateful that we get to hold this space for all of you. So one final round of applause for Yashica and the SOAR team, and thank you all for being here. I will pass it to Himadri to give us the final details to wrap up.
Thank you so much to Yashica and to all of you one last time for joining us for this historic 2-day summit. I'm just filled with so much gratitude and love for each and every one of you. We're going to launch our very last quick Zoom poll of the day, and we'll put our summit feedback survey in the chat as well, which I hope you're feeling extra motivated to fill out after hearing Yashica speak, since then you'll have the chance of winning her book. It's been a very long day, and I think we're right at time, so please feel free to hop off after taking the poll. The SOAR team will stick around for a few minutes, but just thank you. That's all. That's all I got. Thank you so much, everyone.